Let's talk about prehistoric cave paintings. You've seen them before. We've discovered hundreds of caves decorated with prehistoric art, all across the world, on every continent except Antarctica. The oldest cave paintings have been dated back over 40,000 years. They were painted by early Homo sapiens and possibly other now extinct species of human like Neanderthals and Denisovans. Cave paintings should provide us an amazing insight into the lives of these people, and they do, but if these were made by humans, there are some things we would expect to see, especially with hundreds of examples. But we don't see them, and we don't know why they're not present, and it's kind of creepy. Firstly, let's take a brief look at the things we do see. One of the most common forms of cave art are hand stencils, where a human put their hand on the wall and covered the surrounding area with ochre or charcoal or whatever other pigment they had available to them. You've probably seen these before, but have you ever seen some of the more unusual ones? These hand stencils were found in Cosquer Cave in France. Notice anything strange? Some of the hands are missing fingers. Unfortunately, the people who did this are no longer available for comment, so we can only speculate as to why it seems like so many of them look like they don't much care for the no feeding rule at the petting zoo. It's theorized the artists may have belonged to a culture that practiced ritualistic mutilation and may have cut their fingers off as some form of sacrificial offering or to achieve some strange beauty standard. There are plenty of people today who don't mind mutilating themselves, or even their children, so it doesn't seem that far-fetched until you consider that fingers are actually pretty useful and you probably wouldn't want to lose them in a survival setting. So maybe they lost their fingers by accident. Maybe it was just much more common to lose a finger or two back then. I mean, you had all the wild animals, frostbite was probably a big concern, and do you feel like screaming at the video yet? Of course, these stencils don't necessarily imply the people making them were missing fingers. They could have just curled some fingers up before they started painting. This seems more likely, and missing fingers only ever appear in these negative imprints. We've never found a positive handprint with missing fingers. So why would they do this? The simple answer is for fun. You can achieve a greater diversity of shapes by manipulating your digits, so maybe they were just adding variety to their collection of art. There is another theory though. Some believe early language was a combination of vocalization and bodily gestures or signals, so these hands might be displaying an early form of sign language, so this art might actually be a written message. There's decent reason to believe this too. Think about how many shapes you can make with your hand. If we assume that each finger can only have two positions, up or down, then there are 32 permutations of hand positions. If they were just randomly curling their fingers to add variety to their art, then we could reasonably expect to find all permutations. However, in Gargas Cave, also in France, researchers found 114 hand stencils. Of the 32 possible hand positions, only 10 were represented, suggesting that they weren't just doing this at random. There might be some meaning behind it. And the 10 shapes were all ones that can be easily made without support of a surface or another hand. No one's doing this. And this would be pretty easy to do with your hand braced against a wall for painting, but not so easy to do during the course of communication via your hands. So maybe these are only hand signals they used for communication. If that's the case, we still don't know what any of it means, so let's move on. Even more common than hand stencils are paintings of wildlife. Of course, wild animals had a huge significance in the lives of cavemen. Their meat was a source of food, their pelts were a source of clothing, their bones were a source of tools, and their teeth and claws were a source of death. And don't forget, there were a lot more animals roaming around tens of thousands of years ago than there are now. Take a look at this 20,000-year-old painting from Colombia. It's thought this figure represents the now extinct giant ground sloth with a baby by its side and a few members of the local welcoming committee. But this is a fairly crap drawing. No offense, Grunk. Let's have a look at Chauvet Cave in France. Wow, these paintings are over 30,000 years old, but they're still impressive by today's standards. As someone who does a little art myself, I can tell you that the artists who drew these pieces were very talented. Look at how the form is depicted with these beautiful swooping lines. You can tell where the bone presses against the flesh, where the fat hangs off. It really makes me wonder if they had animal carcasses in the cave with them for reference, or if they just drew them from memory. That would be really incredible. But you know what's really weird? There are no humans. You might say, of course there are humans depicted in cave paintings, and you're right, there are, but very little beyond stick figures. If the artists of Chauvet Cave could paint these creatures in such beautiful, naturalistic detail, why didn't they paint themselves or each other in the same way? If they could draw the faces of these animals so recognizably, why did no one ever draw a human face? There's no human faces displaying happiness, sadness, anger, or fear, no depictions of hairstyles or clothing. Actually, there's basically no depictions of humans in Chauvet Cave, despite the vast array of animal paintings. Researchers think there are some vague depictions of human features mixed in with the animals, but, well, just look at the picture. There are some more detailed depictions elsewhere in the world. These rock paintings from Australia might be some of the most detailed prehistoric depictions of humans we've ever found, and they do depict clothing. This art has been estimated to be around 12,000 years old. However, due to the nature of their environment, accurate dating proves difficult, and even if they are that old, apart from the clothing, they're not that much different from what we're used to seeing from prehistoric art. The only representations of humans seem to be very vague, they don't have distinguishable features, they're just stand-ins that could represent anybody rather than specific people. As significant as animals were to prehistoric man, surely prehistoric man was also pretty significant to other prehistoric men. Why wouldn't you also paint yourself? Or your family? Or the people that helped you paint all these animals? Or the people that helped you hunt all these animals? Wouldn't they be just as significant to you? You wouldn't want to represent them as a bit more than stickmen or silhouettes? Was there some reason humans just did not want to draw detailed depictions of humans? We really don't know, but there are a number of theories. We first have to recognize that we're evaluating this art through a modern lens, when the entire concept of art probably meant something completely different to these people, or nothing at all. They may have seen it as just another tool, and what we today think of as art may have been purely functional for them. These could have been tools for learning. A young child would grow up to be a hunter someday, but it might not be safe to expose a child to a wild animal, so a picture might have to suffice until they come of age. Some animal paintings are found with unusual markings across their bodies, and it's thought these may be indications of the animal's reproductive cycles in relation to a lunar calendar. So maybe these were just for information, and there was no need to waste your time and energy drawing a human. The paintings also may have had a religious or magical connotation for early man. Maybe they were part of some ritual, and by creating lots of images of animals and events, they hoped this would have some impact on the world. Like, okay, I drew this on the wall. As long as this is here, the world will be like this. I've locked it in. And if they thought there was some supernatural element to art, then maybe they thought drawing distinguishable humans rather than vague depictions of events involving humans was bad mojo. If they had a real religious belief in art, then maybe drawing an image of a human was considered profane or offensive, or maybe it was just a taboo for some cultural reason. Another thing to consider is today we have a very strong sense of individualism and also a self-obsession. How many pictures of yourself do you have on your phone? Maybe cavemen just didn't care all that much about an individual's thoughts and feelings. Maybe they only really cared about human activity, and that's why we only see depictions of them doing things with no indication as to how they're feeling about these things. It's more like Grunk kill animal, not Grunk see animal and was scared. Then Grunk find inner determination and slay beast. This give Grunk self-reflection. Grunk writes sad poem for animal. Remember, these people lived in a totally different world than us. Today the world is very human-centric, and it's been like that for a long time, but back then there weren't that many of us, and there were a lot more animals, and as far as any human would have known, the world might as well have been infinite. In the grand scheme of things, they were nothing. Everything today revolves around our self-importance. We've had a long time to really consider our place as the masters of the planet and develop our sense of introspection and self-obsession. Maybe these artists lived in a time where these human-centric concepts just didn't exist. They just didn't think of themselves in the same way that we obsess over ourselves today. Being a human maybe just didn't matter nearly as much as it does now. And I'm calling early humans cavemen cavemen, but that's somewhat of a misnomer. The percentage of people who lived in caves was probably quite small. They were hard to navigate, and you needed a torch to see anything. So maybe it's more about the cave than the art. Like maybe they drew faces on everything. Trees, rocks, dirt. But when it came to the caves, maybe they were like, look, let's just draw the informational material, say a prayer, and go. The caves were perhaps a place they only went to for a purpose, and drawing a face could have been considered frivolous. Then, because the art in the caves is naturally shielded from the elements, that's what survives until today, while the faces on the trees, rocks, and dirt are lost to time. None of these points are really satisfying though, and they're all fairly flimsy. I mean, at the end of the day, they were still humans. They were creating art all across the world for tens of thousands of years. They were all different people that probably had all kinds of different views of the world, and not a single one of them drew a human face. Ever? Maybe there's caves out there with detailed humans on the walls that we just haven't discovered yet, and I'd love to see them, but it seems weird we don't have any examples from the hundreds of decorated caves we're already aware of. If we do find paintings of human faces, there's still the question of, why are these the only ones? Why are they such a small percentage of the art? If you're like me, these unanswered questions are like an itch you can't scratch. It's extremely unsatisfying, so let me alleviate at least some of the burden. There are detailed depictions of humans from prehistory. They're just not cave paintings. The so-called Venus figurines are carved sculptures that are thought to be some sort of fertility symbol, so they probably represent a goddess or an ideal rather than a specific person. But they're still probably the most detailed depictions of human figures that we're currently aware of. The Venus of Willendorf was carved from Oolitic limestone about 30,000 years ago. Due to its portable nature, we're not sure exactly where it came from, but somewhere in Europe. It even has some sort of braided hairstyle, or maybe it's a headdress. Still no face though. The Venus of Dolní Věstonice was made from ceramic about 25,000 years ago, also in Europe. There's a child's fingerprint on the statue that was preserved in clay when it was fired, although it's thought the maker was an adult who just handed it to a child to look at before it was turned to ceramic. The sculpture has slits where the eyes should be, but again the rest of the face is featureless. However, at the same site this was discovered, archaeologists found the remains of a middle-aged woman who appeared to have been given a high-status burial 25,000 years ago, which would indicate she was well respected and she may have been some sort of shaman. Her skull was found with deformities to the left side of the face that suggest some traumatic injury that occurred during childhood and left her with some facial disfigurement. Guess what else was found at the same site? An ivory carving of a female face. And it's asymmetrical like the skull. So not only do we have a prehistoric image of a human face, but we think it's a depiction of an actual person. And that's not the only face we found. The Venus of Brosson-Puy is another ivory carving made around 25,000 years ago that depicts a female face. It looks like it broke off a larger figure at some point, and we can't tell if it has hair or a wig or a headdress, but it's undebatably a face. So we did make detailed depictions of humans. Somewhere out there, there's gotta be caves full of paintings of human faces, right? There has to be, right? If we found these small, easily lost examples, surely we'll be able to find examples that have literally been stuck in the same place for tens of thousands of years. If people could carve detailed sculptures of human faces, surely they were painting them on walls in much greater numbers. Right? Well, I've actually been lying to you this whole time because I am indeed aware of at least one cave with very detailed depictions of humans. Facial expressions, hair, clothes, everything. In La Marche Cave, Jesus, these prehistoric Frenchmen were mad into the art. There are over 1,000 images etched into limestone, 155 of which are humans. The images are kind of hard to make out because a lot of them are literally etched on top of each other. But there are humans with smiles on their faces, beards, some of them are obese. They look like they might represent real people. These drawings are supposedly 15,000 years old, but they're a far cry from anything else we've seen from this era. They look more like modern art. And that's why I left it until now to bring it up, because a lot of people think they are modern art. There is a lot of controversy surrounding the Lamarche cave drawings and their authenticity. Some people think they're forgeries. Some organic material found at the site, like an engraved reindeer antler, was studied and found to date back around 15,000 years. But the etchings are not as easy to date. The site was excavated in 1937, and the findings were widely met with skepticism, with some outright accusing the researchers of forging the drawings. Today, nearly 90 years later, it seems like the scientific consensus is leaning more towards the drawings being authentic, but as far as I can tell, there's no definitive proof, and there may never be unless we find another site with similar images that can be dated more precisely. So did cavemen draw detailed depictions of themselves? Maybe. The Venus figurines are probably our best indications that they didn't have a problem with it, or at least some of them didn't, but they might have been the exception to the rule. When we're talking about so many people over such a long period of time, we have to recognize that there were a lot of rules and a lot of exceptions. History has shown that if humans are capable of doing something, then inevitably some of them will do it. When we consider that, we should expect to see more human faces in prehistoric art, right? Our best guess as to why we don't is that maybe our sample size isn't large enough. But if we found every surviving prehistoric artwork tomorrow, would we see that detailed depictions of humans actually do make up a significant portion of them? Maybe even a majority of them, like we might expect? We can only comment on the sample size we do have. And that comment would be, there are barely any human faces depicted in prehistoric art. And that's pretty weird. Okay. Let's go then. Oh, Jesus. They don't have distinguishable. You can tell where the bone precious. You can tell where the bone precious. Stop doing that. Presses. Where the bone presses. You can tell where the foot. I think that's the best take. Every time without fail. Every fucking time. Common forms of cave art are hand stencils, where a human put. What the fuck? And a few members of the local fucking goddamn it. It was good up until that. Maybe they were just like, look, fuck. Bollocks. I am human and I need to belong, just like everybody else does. However, at the same site this was discovered, archaeologists found the remains of a middle-aged... you're fucking cunt, yeah. Okay, that's probably enough then. Oh, I'm getting old.